Hi, everybody. Greetings to all Eves everywhere. I'm glad you're with us. I'm Dennis O'Shea from the class of 1977. I'm also one of the volunteers working this year in the bicentennial of the Society of Alumni. Delighted to be with you here today for this author talk featuring Barbara Bradley Hagerty. We'll be talking about her book, Life Reimagined. Now, this is just one of a year-long series of events we've got commemorating the 200th anniversary of the founding of the Williams College Society of Alumni. As you know, our society is the oldest alumni association in North America and quite possibly the world. We're spending this bicentennial year not only celebrating and grappling with our past, but also examining our present and imagining our future. Together, we envision an inclusive society where all alumni feel they belong. We're united in our shared commitment to a liberal arts education, to lifelong learning of the sort that we're engaging in here today, and most especially to each other and to our college. Many of you have attended other bicentennial events throughout the year, but we're really getting to the heart of it now. The actual 200th anniversary of the Society is September 5th. That's the Sunday of Labor Day weekend. So if you haven't already found a recipe for a purple birthday cake, now is the time to start looking. A few reminders now before we get started. If you have any questions during today's talk, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen at any time. We will have dedicated Q&A time at the end of the program, but you can submit your questions right along as you think of them. Please don't put questions for Barb in the chat, but please do use the chat to engage with your friends and classmates who are here. You can also use the chat to insert any reflections or comments on what you're hearing. And I know that my friends will use the chat for jeers and catcalls, which I promise to ignore. Remember, when you're using the chat function, to select all panelists and all attendees. That option is in the drop-down menu. That way your message can be seen by everyone. Please note that we are recording today's session. And with that, I want to take a moment to introduce our featured speaker, Barbara Bradley Hagerty of the class of 1981. Barb is a New York Times bestselling author and a contributing editor to The Atlantic. She was a correspondent for NPR for 18 years on the Religion and Justice Department beats. She twice received the American Women in Radio and Television Award. She's also been a recipient of the National Headliners Award and the Religion Newswriters Association Award. Barb earned a master's degree in legal studies from Yale, which makes me jealous because I always wanted to go for that degree. At Williams, she majored in economics. There's a lot of very other interesting stuff in her formal bio, and we're going to post a URL in the chat for those of you who would like to dig in further. The book that we're discussing today, Life Reimagined, The Science, Art, and Opportunity of Midlife, was published by Riverhead Penguin in 2016. Barb has also written Fingerprints of God, a book about what science tells us about the brain and spiritual experience. And I suspect we will all find out what book she's working on now a little later as we go along. We're so pleased to have our distinguished fellow alum here with us today. Barb, welcome.
Wow, thank you so much. When I hear people say what I've done, I realize how very old I am. But it's really great to be here, and it's great to see the people in the chat, saying hello to everyone. It's wonderful.
Isn't it great? So let's dive right into the conversation. Now, as you say, the central question in your book is really, how does one thrive at midlife? So let's talk about that, but let's start with some definitions so we know what we're talking about. For one, what actually is midlife and when is it?
Right. So it really depends. Midlife really depends on your level of education. If you have a high school degree but haven't gone beyond that, generally midlife begins in the late 30s and goes until maybe 50 or so. And that's because they start life earlier, right? They get a job earlier, they get married earlier, they have kids earlier, and midlife just comes earlier. Now, if you're a Williams alum and have an advanced degree, a college degree, advanced degree, then midlife is usually more like 45 to 65, 70. It really depends. I mean, baby boomers especially are breaking all the barriers here. So midlife really is a kind of a state of thinking and attitude. And so if you are engaged, if you are continuing to learn, if you have a circle of friends and family, if you do all these things that are good for flourishing in midlife, then you can easily be middle-aged at 70. I'm hoping that's the case because I'm 62.
I'm right there with you. Now, in the book, speaking of definition of midlife, you quote a retired Harvard business professor, his definition of midlife, which I really, really liked. I mean, it just struck me. He defined midlife as, quote, when you start measuring time future and stop measuring time past. And he said, quote, it's when you're starting to say, how am I going to use these glorious days for the best purposes? So how did that resonate with you when you heard him say that? And how well do you think it represents what people really are grappling with at midlife?
Right. No, I think it's a gorgeous statement. It was made by Howard Stevenson, who was at HBS, Harvard Business School. And also he was the chairman of the board of NPR. So I knew him there as well. What I love about that statement is a couple of things. One is the intentionality, that when you realize that you have fewer years ahead of you than behind you, you begin to think, okay, these are precious years, and how am I going to use these glorious years, for good? There's actually a theory. It's called the socio-emotional selectivity theory, and that was kind of discovered or created by Laura Carstensen at Stanford. And her idea is that as your time horizons shrink, you begin to focus on what's really important, and that tends to be other people and a purpose or cause that gives you kind of meaning and joy. So what he's saying there is focus on how you can best use these years, because you know what, they aren't infinite. The other thing I love about the statement is it's so hopeful. I mean, back in 1900, people lived to be 40. We're now living to be 80, 90. And what that means is that we have all these bonus years when we can do things that, because we're strong enough, healthy enough, cognitively, nimble enough to do all these things. And so the question is, how can I use my skills and experience and passions to actually do something meaningful and fulfilling? How can I use these glorious years? Because we have these bonus years.
Yeah, absolutely. So now when most people hear the word midlife, you know what I'm going to say. The next thing that pops into their brain is the C word, crisis, midlife crisis, right? That's not, though, what this book is about. And at least in part, that's because you say it really doesn't happen to most people. So let's have another definition. What is a midlife crisis?
Sure.
And how is the experience of most people different from that?
Right. So there's been this myth of midlife crisis really since Elliot Jacques, who is a Canadian psychoanalyst, came up with this idea of death in the midlife crisis. And it was this idea that, people go through this crisis, this existential angst, when they think that the things they want to achieve, they won't be able to achieve before they die. And so the only solution, of course, is to change partners or change jobs or get a sports car, right? But he came up with this idea. And then Gail Sheehy really universalized it. And you had the forlorn 40s, and you had this kind of the sense of, we go through this desperate existential crisis in our 40s and 50s. Here's the problem. It actually doesn't exist that way. I mean, some people, about 10% of people, do have this existential angst about dying. But psychologists have, kind of scoured and done so many studies, and they found really most people don't have a midlife crisis. Only about 10% of people have a midlife crisis, which doesn't mean that midlife isn't hard. It is, but we don't have an existential angst about it where we have to buy a sports car.
So then, after you dispose in the book of the concept of midlife crisis, or at least being relevant to most people, you do talk about something else which is very, very interesting. You talk about the U curve of happiness.
Right.
What is that?
Right. So you're right. If most people don't have a midlife crisis, most people have this definite slump in happiness, basically in their 40s. It's called the U curve of happiness. And here's how it works. In your 20s, you have all these dreams. I can find a cure to cancer. I can win a Pulitzer. I can, launch a startup. I can earn $1 billion, whatever it might be. You have all these dreams. And then in your 30s, a lot of people are, married, and they're beginning, and they're having children, and they have all these responsibilities at work, and it gets even more intense in your 40s and 50s as you have aging parents and a mortgage and college tuition, and life is hard. And so at that point, people realize that they're probably not going to realize those dreams of their youth, right? And they have this moment or a series of moments when they realize it's not going to work out the way I thought it was. But here's the really wonderful surprise about that. At that point, generally in your late 40s or so, people begin to get happier. So the 40s, for women, it's 40. For men, it's 50 in America. You hit this nadir, and then you begin to get happier. And the reason you begin to get happier is because people begin to, they acknowledge, I'm not going to be Bill Gates, right? And they say, okay, so what is really important? I'm going to focus on those two things: other people, friends and family, and a purpose or cause that gives me meaning and joy. So when they begin to do that reorientation toward what matters,
Yep.
to kind of get rid of the stuff like I need 4 cars and a huge house, to get rid of that stuff and focus on the stuff that actually matters and that they have in their control, then people begin this wonderful swoop up the U curve of happiness. So a man on a walker at 80 is happier than a man who's 50 at the height of his career, generally. And they've done this study in 180 different countries. And while the curve may be different, like it might be in America, we tend to be a little less happy, a little happier than people say in Haiti. But the curve is the same, except for one place, and that's Russia. And in Russia, what happens is you hit 18, and that's the pinnacle, and then it's all downhill from there. That's literally what they found.
How do they measure the U curve?
It's surveys. It's literally hundreds of thousands of surveys of people and where they are in each stage of life. Like they talk to people in their 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s. Okay. And then they see this U curve.
Okay. Well, so we've got like an hour here to talk about a book that's like 450 pages. So we're not going to be able to get into every nuance about memory and marriage and children and careers and adversity, and all that's in there. So I recommend people get the book and really dig in. But if I had to sum it up all very quickly, you've actually sort of all previewed what I'm about to say. I would choose two words that kind of run through the course of Life Reimagined, two words that represent what we should be looking for in midlife and beyond. And the first word is engagement, which I read a lot of times. And the second you've mentioned is purpose.
Right, right. And I actually consider those basically to occupy the same zip code. Really, it's a kind of optimistic and intentional way of thinking. Let me just tell you one story that for me encapsulates engagement. So when my mother was 89, she's now 100, she just turned 100.
Wow.
When she was 89, she had a stroke, and it was right before Memorial Day, about 5 days before Memorial Day. And she went into the ICU, and, she wasn't talking at all. She was in and out of consciousness. And on Monday morning, on Memorial Day, a neurologist came in, followed by a bunch of students. And she, was talking to my mother, and my mom hadn't said a word. And so my brother was there. I wasn't there, but my brother was there. And the neurologist said, "Mrs. Bradley, we just want to see kind of how you are on identifying things. What are those green things on the trees? When you look outside, what are those green things on the trees?" And Mom just kind of shrugged. And she said, "Okay, what are those vehicles going down the street? What do you call those?" And Mom just shrugged and, kind of looked helpless. And my brother said, "Ask her what her favorite Sunday morning talk show is." And she said, "Mrs. Bradley, what's your favorite Sunday morning talk show?" And Mom said, "Fareed Zakaria's GPS." Those were the first words she said after her stroke, right? So here's the thing about Mom. Mom couldn't care less about horticulture or gardening or leaves on the trees. She couldn't care less about cars. She loved the news. She read the New York Times and Washington Post cover to cover every day. She was a CNN addict. She wanted to know all about, the Arab Spring and the election of Barack Obama. And she was so engaged with the world and with her kids and with everyone she met. She was so engaged. So yes, that is the idea of engagement. And actually what happened to her is within about a month and a half, Mom had fully recovered from her aphasia. She had completely recovered. And the therapist told me that this was, and this goes to engagement too, she said, "Your mom is a miracle patient, because usually when octogenarians, have a stroke, they look back with sadness, not forward with hope and interest." And she said, "What your mom did is she looks forward with hope." And Mom would she'd love to have her kids visit every day. She loved to read the New York Times and the Washington Post. Mom had a reason to get up in the morning, and she was engaged in the world. And the therapist said that is why she made the recovery she did.
So, my fellow Eves here would kill me if I didn't ask how's she doing at 100.
She's doing great. She's healthy as an ox. She broke her arm last fall, which meant that she couldn't be on her walker easily anymore. So she's been more sedentary, and that's taken a toll on her cognitive abilities. I would say that until then, she was sharp as a whip. And now, she still rallies at the 100-year party for her. She was basically ordering people around and, telling them to sit down in couples. And so she's great.
Good for your mom. Well, it's another woman we want to talk about next, and that's a woman named Marge. And actually what we want to talk about is the brain of Marge, because she is dead and we've looked at her brain. And she is really one of your top arguments in your book for living life with real purpose. Can you talk a little bit about Marge and her brain, and also about what the implications of that story for why purpose in life really matters?
Right. That's a great, Marge is incredible. If I can just give you the backstory on how I got to meet Marge's brain. So when I was doing my book, I was interested in a study done by Rush University Medical Center in Chicago. So I went out there and I met a woman named Julie Schneider, who is a neuropathologist. She studies the brains of dead people. And she led me into this spotless, chilly room. And there, laid out on a tray like little slices of cauliflower, are slices of the brain of a woman named Marge. And she picked it up. She actually hadn't looked at this one under the microscope yet, but she was suspicious that she saw something a little funny about the brain, plaques or tangles or whatever. And so she talked to me about it. And then we went and she looked at the brain under the microscope. And what she found is that Marge had the plaques and tangles of intermediate level Alzheimer's disease. But here's the thing about Marge. She never showed a single symptom of Alzheimer's when she was alive. And so Marge was part of this 25-year-old study, which Rush now has been doing. And what they do is every year they go out to, and they do cognitive and psychological tests and other tests of people who are 60 or older in retirement homes. And they test them every year. And then the agreement is once the person has died, they get to autopsy the brain. And so they're able to measure their cognitive progress and everything else. And so at this point, they've done more than 1,000 autopsies, and they have a pretty good idea of what they can do is they can look back at these autopsies and they can see who had Alzheimer's disease, the plaques and tangles of Alzheimer's. And then they can look back and see how did those people perform, kind of how were they cognitively? And what they found was that fully 1/3 of the people who had Alzheimer's disease didn't show a single symptom. No memory loss, no confusion, no personality changes, no changes in their cognitive scores. Marge aced every one of her tests until she died at 87, and she had intermediate level Alzheimer's disease. And what I love this. They call these people escapees. Isn't that great? You escape the symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. So the question is, they could go back and they could say, okay, now what do these escapees do differently? And what can we learn from this? And they could go back and look at all their scores and their lifestyle habits, their psychological profile, intellectual pursuits, all of that stuff. And they found the usual suspects, people who did well, had lots of family and friends, they exercised, they read the paper every day, they were cognitively challenged. But there was one trait that had far, far, far more impact than any other trait. And that was a trait called purpose in life, a psychological trait called purpose in life. People who scored high in purpose in life were less than half as likely to lose their memories to Alzheimer's disease than people who scored low on purpose in life. In other words, people who had a reason to get out of bed in the morning were far, far more likely to keep their brains intact, essentially, keep them sharp. Now, it wasn't purpose in life isn't kind of the perfect magic bullet or whatever, because 2/3 of people do show symptoms, even those who have high purpose in life. But I was really, really happy to know that there's a mindset that can up your chances, at least, of keeping your memories intact. And so with Marge, I'll just say her purpose in life, she had a really bad back, so she was bedridden a lot of the time. But every week she would call the library and they would send her a box of books, biographies, history, psychological thrillers, whatever it was. She would read an entire box of books, and usually good stuff, every week. And that was her purpose in life. Yeah. So it wasn't a huge thing, but it got her up in the morning.
Yeah. Sounds a lot like my stepmother, I have to tell you. So what you're saying is it doesn't have to be a huge save the world, I'm gonna make things better kind of purpose. Right. It's more manageable, something littler.
Right. You don't have to actually find the cure to cancer, and that doesn't have to be or feed the hungry or whatever. So basically, everyone purpose in life can be anything that gives you some kind of joy, but also that sets goals for you. I mean, one of the things about midlife, I'll just say one of the things about midlife, as one person put it, is it's like one long run-on sentence. Right. So when you're 20s and 30s, you start a lot of things. You graduate from college, you get married, you have kids, you start a new job. There are all these milestones. And then you hit midlife, and it's like a run-on sentence with no real challenges. Like, you're an accountant. right? And you've got kids and everything's the same. And that's hard. So what you do with kind of this little purpose, that's what I call it, is you want to have things that make you excited, that challenge you. It can be learning. I talked to one woman who wanted to learn Spanish, always had. And she learned Spanish and now she travels every vacation down to South America. Or people who want to pick up the guitar after all these years. Or for me, it was cycling and getting into competitive cycling. Whatever it is, it's something that gives you joy and that creates challenges and it sets goals so that your life isn't as monotonous as it possibly could be. It doesn't have to be huge, but it should be something that challenges you.
Yeah, I suspect the answer to this is going to be no, but did Julie Schneider, that neuropathologist, have any inklings of an idea about how something psychological like purpose could affect something physical like the plaques and tangles in your physical brain?
You know, they aren't sure about it. And I'd have to go back and look at one of her papers because I think to tell you the truth, it's been a few years since I wrote the book and I haven't read it since I wrote it. So I imagine that either she had something to say about that or David Bennett, who did the studies. And there's probably a brain mechanism, but I just can't remember what it is.
Yeah.
I'm sorry about that.
No. That question came out of left field. So another thing that one of the people you talk to, a psychologist, tells you is he calls it the 5-word key. And it's, quote, happiness is love, full stop. That's pretty simple.
Yeah.
And not just romantic love or even family love, friends.
Right.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah. That was George Valiant who did that famous Harvard study, which is a book that everyone should read. I think it's a wonderful idea. It is so simple. Happiness is love, full stop. The interesting thing about the studies is that they suggest, there haven't been a huge number, but they suggest that friendship is actually even more important than family in terms of thriving through sickness, through old age, through everything else. And the reason the psychologists believe this is true is because you can choose your friends, but you can't choose your in-laws, right? And so there's a fair degree of stress that comes with family that basically you can opt out of when it comes to friends. You can choose the friends that make you really happy. And what friends are amazing. They really help you navigate life. They allow you to offload the stress, which is one of the big killers in life, right? They allow you to kind of cope with, I can't talk to my husband when I'm mad at him, so I can talk to my friend about it. I can talk to my friend about how do I navigate this issue at NPR? How do I, they help you actually get through the slings and arrows of life. Right. And they do it with relatively little downside. And so friends are considered really purpose in life and friends are really the two magic bullets when it comes to midlife. Those are really the secrets. I'll save you the $295 plus shipping, the book, friendship and purpose in life. That's what you need to do. And friendships are just terrific. And so what they do, I'll just mention two things. They have found that people with a large circle or close friends, friendships boost your immune system. They repair your skin. You live longer. You recover more quickly from cancer. You actually retain your memories longer. You cognitive strength longer if you have friends. And the other thing I would say, the flip side, is that loneliness is like a serial killer. Seriously, like George Bonanno just came out with a book about this. It showed people who are lonely, they die more quickly, they struggle with disease more quickly. Not having friends is actually worse for you than smoking, drinking, and having a sedentary life. Really, it's a killer. So the public service announcement here is develop new friends, get back in touch with old friends. It's going to make you healthier and happier.
So there is science behind all this. And you actually, while reporting and writing the book, sort of put yourself into the science. Talk about that.
I did. So there's this wonderful study at UVA, a researcher named Jim Cohn has looked at pairs of people and, siblings, friends, mother and child. And he's done this really, really interesting study. And I'll just describe it. So I went down to UVA with a good friend of mine, Cherie, and we got there, they were warming up the MRI machine. And what they did is they clamped this anklet onto my ankle, my left ankle. And this anklet was going to give me what he described as just a small little static shock, like walking across a room with wool socks, right? On a rug. Nothing bad, nothing really bad, painful, but it'll give you a little shock. And they would do this at various times. And let me just describe it. So they rolled me into the brain scanner and I could see a screen above me. And what I could see was either an X or a 0. And whenever I saw 0, it meant that I wasn't going to get shocked in the next, 10 seconds. But whenever I saw an X, a red X, by the way, I had a 20% chance of getting shocked. So I'm like, that's cool, whatever. It's just a static electric shock. They wanted to see what my brain would do in 3 different conditions. One was when I was alone. The second was when I was holding the hand of a stranger, one of the engineers. And then the third was when I was holding Cherie's hand. Oh. So it starts and I'm like, this is cool, this is fine. And then I get this shock. My leg whips up, it's really painful. And so from then on, I'm in this, every time I see an X, I'm in this kind of lather of anxiety, right? Just, am I going to be shocked or not? And they wanted to see what the fear centers of my brain would do in these 3 different conditions. And eventually I got out and they did the analysis, and I was like virtually everyone else that they tested. And this is what my brain said. My brain said, when I was alone, and when I was holding the hand of a stranger, when I saw that red X, the fear centers of my brain just lit up like a Christmas tree. It was like, it was saying, run, 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 get out of this MRI as fast as possible. Get this anklet off of me. But when I was holding Cherie's hand, my good friend, the fear centers actually quieted down.
Wow.
Yeah.
Even though the same thing was happening, you were going to get shocked.
Same thing happening, but it quieted down. And what they've done, scores of tests like this, and it's really basically the same neurological quirk. And so what he realized is that friendships actually, it's what we said, they offload stress. There's a physiological kind of proof that they offload stress. And so what, when he was thinking about this, he couldn't figure out after the first few trials why this would be. Why would your brain get quieter when you're still being shocked or possibly shocked?
Right.
And what he realized, he kind of went back, he talked to a bunch of other scientists, and he said, it probably has to do with evolution. So let's go back to, our ancestors from 10,000 BC. And, one of your ancestors, he's walking through the woods and he sees a bear and he's all alone. And what his brain says is run, 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 because he has to outrun the bear, right? So that's one condition. Then another condition is, your ancestor is walking through the woods and he sees a bear, but he also sees another tribesman another guy from another tribe over there. And his brain still says, run, 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 but it wasn't quite as intense because he doesn't have to outrun the bear. He only has to outrun the other tribesman, right? To be safe. But then say your ancestor is out walking around and he's with his hunting buddy and the two of them see a bear. Well, suddenly the bear isn't a stressful, fearful thing. The bear is dinner, right? So that's what friends do. They help you navigate these really difficult times. And there are physiological and neurological evidence for this, which is, I think, so very cool.
That's terrific. Yeah, it really is. Just want to spend a moment here to remind folks that if we're coming up on the Q&A probably fairly soon. If you've come up with questions that you want to ask Barb, please don't use the chat function. Please put them in the Q&A function, and we'll be at that point of the program pretty soon. I'm struck, Barb, by an observation you make near the end of the book. There's a lot of science reporting in this book. You've just talked about some of the science that you witnessed personally. And of course, science and medicine can do a lot for us. But what you say at the end about a successful midlife is the solution is from the inside. It's all about how you think, how you engage your mind. So, you go on to say it demands intention, energy, and effort every single day.
Yeah.
So there is no magic pill. I mean, there's lots of things that you've talked about that you can do,
Right.
but you really have to, within yourself, be seeking
purpose,
the serenity of that you're after. It's not, there's nothing outside is going to give it to you.
Yeah, I really think that's true. I mean, you look, we can all eat more vegetables. I don't like that idea because I am a Cheetos nut, but you can eat more vegetables. You know, you can exercise, you can do all sorts of things that are good for your brain and good for your health. But what I would say is that actually, you know, I kind of briefly wanted to argue that my book should be called Autopilot is Death. And they thought that would turn off readers. But the fact is that autopilot is death. Like if you just kind of go through your life and not work on your relationships and not work on your career or your hobbies or your whatever, or your, you know, your passions, whatever it might be, then it's bad. It's bad. It results in a kind of an early and sad old age. So what I would say is that crossword puzzles are not the answer. Vegetables may not be the answer, although they're good. What I would say is that everyone has a different way of finding what's purposeful and meaningful for them, what they want to spend their time and intention and kind of zeal for. And so what gets you out of bed in the morning, Dennis, is going to be very different from what gets me out of bed. Yep. And what you need to do is really just take an inventory of yourself. By the time you read Midlife, you know what you're good at and what you're bad at. You know what you like doing and what you don't like doing. And so what you need to do is take an inventory and say, how can I be intentional about using my skills, my talents, my passions for good, right? For something that's purposeful and meaningful. How can I do that? And I mean, we're coming right back to the beginning. What Howard Stevenson said, you know, how can I use these glorious years ahead of me? And so that's what we need to do. It's this idea, my mom used to say, your thinking is your experience. Now it sounds simplistic, and it's a little bit, but in fact, it's true that how you think really does frame how you experience the world. And everyone has problems. I'm not saying you can think your way out of cancer. What I am saying, though, is that if you're going to recover from cancer, the way you think will absolutely accelerate the recovery, right? So maybe you can't get over huge hurdles, but the way you think about them will affect the way you experience the hurdles. I'm not being Pollyanna. I'm not saying everything's perfect. We all have problems, but it is really, really important about how we frame those problems and those challenges. And that every day, you know, you wake up and you think, okay, I have a bonus day. I'm alive right now. What can I do with this day?
There you go. I love it. I'm going to ask one more question before we get into the Q&A, because the question I'm going to ask is because I think it's contractually required that I read this one particular quick excerpt from Life Reimagined. And it's from page 10. And you're talking about the day you started your sabbatical from NPR to write this book. And you write, quote, "When January 1, 2013, I drove from a sunny, chilly Washington, D.C. to a lonely, dark, bitterly cold Williamstown, Massachusetts." So on behalf of almost everyone here, we can relate to that. On the next page, you say that you hope that writing this book would change you. And it is a very personal book, a lot of science, a lot of journalism, but also a lot of you. And a lot does happen to you in the course of the year that you're writing the book. How did the experience change you, and who are you now, and what are you doing now?
Right. I'll be really fast because I could take an hour just talking about me. but it really changed what I did, because a couple of years later, I developed a paralyzed vocal cord, which made it really, really difficult to do radio for NPR. I'd lose my voice for weeks at a time. So I thought, okay, what am I going to do about this? And I thought about the research that I was doing. I mean, I was still on sabbatical when this vocal cord problem happened. And so I thought, okay, how can I use the research, all I've learned from the book, to help me chart my future course? How do I do that? And what I realized, basically, how can I use my experience and talents and passions for something meaningful? And what I did is I looked back on my life, and I would really, really encourage people to do this. I looked back and I said, from all my career life, what is the thing that got me up in the morning? What were the stories as a journalist that I was most excited about? And it took me about a nanosecond, literally, to figure that one out. And they were about injustice, stories about wrongful convictions, that kind of thing. I'd done a bunch of them for NPR. And so I ended up writing for The Atlantic. I wrote a story in 2018 that was right smack in the middle of my kind of passion wheelhouse. And it was about a guy named Ben Spencer, who had been at that point in prison for 30 years on very scant evidence, no physical evidence, fingerprints, DNA, nothing to connect him to the crime, just 3 witnesses who said they saw him running away from a car and a jailhouse snitch. And so I reinvestigated. The guy had been in, he had lost all his appeals. He had no legal remedies left. And he was in there for life. He'd been there when he was 22 to, at that point, 52. And so I reinvestigated the case, went down to Dallas, and oh boy, did I have fun. I was with a private investigator, and we went all over Dallas, knocking on doors and finding new alibi witnesses, and 3 out of 4 of the witnesses were canted. And it was like, It was so much fun. I cannot tell you how much fun it was. And so I ended up writing this story. And what happened is that it came out in 2018, and Dallas elected a new district attorney who read the story. And I'm not responsible. There are a lot of people who were involved, like investigators who were involved. But I think the Atlantic story made a difference. And he reopened the case, and Ben got out in March after 34 years in prison. Wow. And so when I look back, I don't have kids. So I can't say the most meaningful thing I've done is to, raise good kids, which I think most people here could say. But when I look back, that is going to be the most meaningful thing I've done. And now I'm writing a book about how it's using Ben as the kind of narrative spine, how it's so easy to convict innocent people and almost impossible to get them out.
There's another book to look forward to. When do you expect to publish that?
So it's due July 15th, and it should be out. It should be out kind of sometime 2023, and I'm not sure the pub date yet.
Gotcha. So we do have a bunch of questions here in the queue, and we have about 15 minutes left. So let's try and whip through these as quick as we can. This first one is from a classmate of mine who's a doc, and you'll be able to tell that she is a doc when you hear the question. Who is the author of the Shock and Fear study? I guess that's the UVA study. And she says, we could use that study to help change practice in folks who have to have serial imaging studies looking for disease recurrences, the fear that you get by being in a scanner.
Wow, yes, that's really interesting. The author of the study is a guy named James Cohn, C-O-A-N, and he's at UVA. He's still there. I talked to him a few weeks ago, so he's there. And yeah, I mean, I think this area, it's not all that well studied, and so the more the merrier.
Yeah. Here's a question. You referenced several different studies, all of which were quite interesting. Did any of them sort people by socioeconomic backgrounds to see if the results would differ? Are there different findings? You mentioned at the beginning, it's different by education.
Yes, it is. Education and wealth. Education more than wealth. People who are educated thrive more than people who aren't educated. And wealth has something to do with it as well. I mean, they're correlates, right? But education really is the dividing line. However, what they've also found is they've done studies of people across socioeconomic lines. And what they have found is that people who are less educated but score on high purpose in life flourish in the same way that a college educated person does. So it's very, I mean, really, they have found that purpose in life is basically the magic bullet. But the more education, the better. And that makes sense because you're using your brain, you're curious, you're probably in a challenging career, you're reading the New York Times, that kind of thing. And it just makes sense that education would be the big factor.
So I'm going to pass this question along because I know that you are, that you talk about your personal background quite a bit in the book and your family background. And one of the things you talk about is your family being Christian Scientists, and you originally were a Christian Scientist.
Right.
The question is Mom a Christian Scientist? But you can answer that. But you can also talk about how your perspective on all the things you found was informed by your background in Christian Science.
Yes, Mom is still a Christian Scientist. She deigns to take a few, like blood pressure medication for David and me. But she doesn't really think it does anything for her because she's a Christian Scientist, but she's being good to us. My outlook on life is completely framed. It was formed by Christian Science. And by that, I mean, there are parts of Christian Science that I've shed, this idea that matter isn't real or this world is an illusion, that kind of thing. But Christian Science, Mary Baker Eddy, who was the founder of Christian Science, founded it in 1865, a woman in 1865 founding a religion. She was way, way, way ahead of the scientists when it comes to things like the mind-body problem, the mind-body connection and psychoneuroimmunology and all of this stuff. How we think for her affects your body, but it also affects your outlook on life. It affects this is what Christian Science is all about. How you pray, how you think affects your job status, your relationships, your physical health, all of that stuff. So it was a huge, huge part of my life. I ended up, I wrote a book about the science of spirituality, as you mentioned, and I ended up leaving Christian Science. I'd been wanting to leave for a while, but when I was at Yale Law School, I had got the flu and I had this, I was really sick and I had this happy encounter with Tylenol that just changed my life. It was like, wow, I feel great 5 minutes after taking it. So that kind of did it for me. So I really like medicine, but I also like the mindset of Christian Science.
Yeah. So this question is going to call for probably speculation on your part because it's not stuff that was happening even when when you did the research on your book. And so what you've read, you've been a part of the world this past year and a half. And this questioner asks about COVID impacts on people and their loneliness and their involvement with friends and so forth.
Well, you're right. Obviously COVID came way after my book was done, but you look at the statistics on suicide, right? And you look at depression. And that really does have to do with loneliness. It really, COVID is basically this national experiment in loneliness. And it's not good. If anything, it confirms what the science has already said about how unhealthy, how lethal being alone is. Yeah. And you see it, and you see it in every age group too. You see it from kids to the elderly, that being isolated has a really detrimental effect on their moods, on their health, everything. So it's really, as I said, a national study and a national experiment in loneliness right now. and it's tragic.
Yeah. Here's an interesting question. The question was asking about the effects of exterior stress. If one is taking care of parents, messed up kids, etc., there is purpose there, but there's also pervasive worry, and the time spent on those things prevent you from pursuing a purpose that you might prefer. That has more to do with who you are and what you would like to achieve. So
right,
that's sort of a conflict there.
It's so true. And I mean, you know, my mom being 100, ever since she had her stroke, my brother and I see her every single day that we're in town. And I mean, that's why we have a slump in happiness, is because it's a really stressful time. And it gets less stressful when kids go away, but then you have you have your parents to take care of. So you're kind of trading one stress for another. And what I would say is I would say a couple things. One is hang on, because it will get better. The other thing I would say is that I think part of the problem and part of the wisdom of getting older is to shed things that you can shed that are deleterious to your psychological or physical health. So if a friend is a huge burden or whatever, you don't have to have that person in your life. What midlife is about is kind of focusing in on those things that you can do well and that engage you and that are right to do. Right? There's a lot of obligation in midlife, and right through for us, for our generation, you know, until our parents die.
Sure.
So you're right. It's a catch-22. I personally have exercised every single day since I've been 18, unless I'm on my deathbed. I find a time to do it. I will, you know, because frankly, I don't know how I'd get through the day if I didn't go running or if I didn't, you know, cycle or something like that. So I've made that a huge priority. It doesn't mean that it takes 2 hours a day. It could just take a half an hour. But I think everyone can take a half an hour to do something that gives them joy.
Here's another good question. In all the research you read, particularly about friendship, this person is asking about, did you find a lot about, did you see a lot about gender differences in friendship? Are men and women?
Yes. In fact, Jim Cohn believes the reason men die earlier is because they don't have as many friends. Really, that's what he thinks. Now, there are probably other reasons, but his view is that women are really, really good at maintaining and making friends. You know, in midlife, or especially in the busier times of child rearing, what we should be doing is maintaining our friends, but we can't. We shed them, right? You just focus on career and family and a few people, maybe adults who are parents of your kids' friends, right? Like, and what we should be doing is trying to kind of maintain some of our friends.
Yeah.
But when things get easier, what you should do is reinvigorate those friendships. And men are really bad at this, and women are really good at this. And so all you men out there, you need to pick up the phone and call a friend from you know, the class of 81 or the class of 77 and you know, plan to get together in Montana, and you know, you can like pretend you're big bad guys, you know, climbing a mountain or something. But you know, do it. It's worth it. It's effort. It's like it's kind of like a fire alarm that you need to keep putting the batteries in. It feels like a pain, but you know what? It's really, really important to do, because those friendships are going to be wonderful for your health.
I'm going to pass along a question here, but I don't know if you're going to be able to extract this from the recesses of your brain. If you're not, we'll ask the questioner to go find the book and read it and find it for himself. But apparently somebody in the chat talked about your 5 pillars of happiness. And this questioner asked, what are those 5 pillars of happiness?
You know what? I don't know what they are.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
That's all right.
I'm interested. So when you find out, let me know. Maybe I'll put it up on the resource page.
Well, that question came from Marty Wasserman, who's here in Baltimore. And Marty, I'd be happy to lend you the book. Let's see. Here's one. thinking of what you said about having a purpose in life and the importance of friendships made me think about having a dog. It gets you out of bed in the morning, offers you friendship. Has there been research about how pets help older people live longer, happier lives if they don't have maybe, those people right around them that they love
Right.
immediately? They at least have somebody that cares if they're around.
I am positive there have been studies about this. I didn't look at it in my book, but anecdotally, don't we all know older people who basically come to life when they have a dog? My mom, she was, after her stroke, we gave her a dog, and I swear she really loves that dog a lot more than her kids. That dog is everything to her. And I mean, don't we all know that? And, it's fur therapy. I mean, that's what dogs are. They're fur therapy. I have a dog. We have a dog. We always have. Yes, I am absolutely positive that there is research on this, but I didn't look at it. But anecdotally, it just makes so much sense.
Absolutely. So we have time for one more question, and here's one that actually does tie into something I know you said in the book. The question is, do you have any daily affirmations you say each day or other daily rituals to help remind you to focus on the important issues? I don't know the answer to that, but I do know that in the book, you talk about the ritual you had for dealing with your vocal cord stress and what you said to yourself to get your mind someplace else.
Right. So, and that was, I had pretty acute pain with my vocal cords, and I was on 24, not pain pills, but amitriptyline and gabapentin a day. And it made me feel really groggy all the time, and I wanted to get off it. So when I would feel the stress, and it would really shoot up during stress, which wasn't great at NPR, as you can imagine, which is a stressful place to work. What I would do is first, my vocal cord was actually healing. We knew that from the medicine, but I still had this emotional layer to the pain. All pain has two layers to it. It has the hand on the stove layer that says, oh, get the hand off the stove. And then it's got the emotional layer, not all pain, but a lot of pain. Chronic pain does, where you go, oh my gosh, my vocal cords are beginning to hurt. Oh my gosh, and I have a speech to give, or I have to do an interview, and and it ratchets it up. So I would say, okay, first, that's not my vocal cord speaking, that's my brain, that's my fear speaking. Right. And then I would meditate a little bit and just calm myself down. And then I would do something purposeful. I would basically do an interview. I would do something that distracted me, that got me away from the pain and was positive and moved the ball forward. And so I'd do an interview. And so, but in terms of rituals every day, for one thing, I'm certainly not perfect about this. Let me just assure you, I have many days where I'm really discouraged. But I think having certain things in my life, like the cycling every day, like, trying to have a good conversation with my husband at least once a day. We're both busy. Doing purposeful things helps me get through the day. And other rituals too, like everyone has different things, but I'm pretty serious about my faith. So I go to church every week, and I'm involved in my church, and I pray every day. So there are these rituals that I have incorporated into my life that frames it. It's kind of the structure of my life, and that just helps me keep going.
Well, it's been a great hour, and it's an hour that sort of zoomed by. Thank you, Barb, for taking the time to share your work with the EVE community. And I have to say, you're a real credit to yourself, your friends, your colleagues, your family, and all us fellow Williams grads.
No, wait, they're taping this, so I can play that back to my husband, right? Yeah.
And I also want to thank our audience members for joining us. I don't know how many people ended up being able to make it, but there are over 250 people registered. So we know that this is a topic that people are interested in, and you engaged and you asked insightful and interesting questions, and I know Barb and I really appreciate that. Just a reminder to everyone that there will be more meaningful conversations and workshops and programs of this sort as part of the Society of Alumni Bicentennial throughout the rest of the year. Another thing you can do, I mentioned earlier on that the bicentennial looks forward to try and plan the future of our society as well as celebrate the past. You probably all received in your email in the last couple of days from Cape Royal Ramsdale a link to a survey. And we really, really hope that you take advantage of the opportunity to tell us what you think is important about the Society of Illinois, what would get you more involved, how the Society of Illinois can serve all of us better than it already does. So please keep an eye out for that. Please engage with your Williams friends and with our 200-year-old society. Thanks, Barb. Thanks to everyone for joining us, and happy 200th birthday to all of us on September 5th. Take care, everybody.
Bye.